lovely writers and readers of the internet. I am Kristen Kieffer and welcome back to my channel. Recently, I've been receiving a lot of requests to do an update on my writing journey. Over the past 5 years, I have been working on my writing rather seriously, and I've kind of shared my journey quite a bit along the way over at my website at well-storied.com, and now here on YouTube I've kind of begun to share my journey here as well. Previously, I shared an update on my writing journey and as well as my writing goals for the coming month, each and every month, during the read and written recaps that I did over on my blog. However, this past month I decided not to share any updates, not to share any plans for the coming month, and I'm going to talk more about why I made that decision later on in this video. But first, for those of you who have just met me, or maybe you've just never really cared to keep up with my writing journey in the past, but you're kind of curious now, I'm going to share what I write. I am a writer of speculative fiction. If you don't know, speculative fiction is just the umbrella term for anything that's not based in our real world, any sort of magical qualities. So this would be horror, paranormal, fantasy, urban fantasy, science fiction, all that kind of good stuff. In particular, I am the biggest fan of writing fantasy books, and even more in particular, I prefer to write medieval fantasy books. I grew up absolutely loving Lord of the Rings, and that kind of got me into reading all sorts of medieval fantasy, and it's always been the genre that I love the most and that I want to write the most in. So 5 years ago, I had my very first story idea that I really decided to take seriously. This story idea led me to create the world of Mavrin. Mavrin is the fantasy world that I absolutely love writing in. I call it my passion project, and honestly I kind of love to spend most of my career writing within this story world. I'd like for it to be my Middle-earth, or my Westeros, or my Narnia. So when I first set out to write this story idea, it was called The Astral Stone, and I began and quit and started over with writing this first draft of this novel like a million times because I had no idea what I was doing yet. I didn't understand much of anything about the craft of writing, and so I was just kind of winging it. Eventually, however, I did manage to finish a complete first draft, and it was about that time that I finally began to teach myself about the craft of writing, and one of the very first things that I learned was plotting. I quickly fell in love with plotting, looked back on my draft of The Astral Stone, and realized that the entire plot was crap. So I pretty much ended up completely overhauling the entire plot of The Astral Stone, really only keeping the main characters, and then I redrafted the entire story into what is now called The Dark Between. And this is the book that you'll probably hear me talk about the most, or you probably have heard me talk about the most if you've been following along with my writing journey so far. The Dark Between is the first book in a planned 7-book epic fantasy series. I kind of go back and forth about whether this will be a young adult series or an adult series, which is probably not a very good thing to go back and forth on, though in all honesty it would probably work best as new adult if new adult can just get over its stigma of being young adult with sex. But anywho, after I drafted the new version of The Astral Stone, which became known as The Dark Between, I decided to really dive into just learning as much about the craft of writing as I can. I had recently started my own writing blog to kind of chronicle what I had learned and to share those things with other writers on the internet. And so that same year, in 2015, it was November, it was National Novel Writing Month, and I decided to take those 30 days of November and try to write a brand new novel. And so I ended up writing 83,000 words in the month of November that year for what was called Dreamworld. Dreamworld was a young adult paranormal romance. It took place in our world, it took place in Connecticut, and it was about a girl who discovers that her dreams were a portal to the spirit world. She discovers that her long-lost father, who she never knew, has been dead for a long time, but now he's trying to break the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead to come back and wreak havoc and be all, Hitlery. So The Dark Between was kind of the second or third novel that I wrote, depending on how you want to look at it. I don't really have any plans to do anything with Dreamworld right now. I had so much fun writing it, but it just wasn't the genre that I wanted to really pursue with the writing career I'm hoping to build. So Dreamworld ended up being much more of a practice novel for me. I won't say that I'm never going to pull it out and work on it ever again, but right now I just don't have any plans to do anything with it. After I wrote Dreamworld, I went back to working on The Dark Between, and I wrote the complete second draft. But one thing I realized, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later in the video, was that this book, if I chose to go the traditional publishing route, was a terrible first book to query because it broke like all of the market standards. It was an extremely long book. It had so many point of view characters. It would be a big risk for publishers. It wasn't a smart book to try to use to get my first agent and to get my, a publishing deal. So around this time, I decided to kind of brainstorm a new series that I could use to help launch my writing career. And what I came up with was also based in my story world of Maverin. It was a 4-book series called The Books of Maverin. Each book in this 4-book series had the ability to stand on its own, while overall the whole series also kind of connected. Kind of like the Narnia books in that sense. And so I plotted out the kind of main arcs for all 4 books, and then I plotted in depth the first book in this series, which I called Lady Legacy. And then I drafted Lady Legacy. Around the same time, I also created the full plot outlines for books 2 and 3 in this series, but I'm still working on book 4's outline. It's giving me a little bit of trouble. Still with me? After I drafted Lady Legacy last summer, I kind of fell into a writing rut. By November, I kind of really ground to a standstill, and it was because of a lot of stuff that was going on in my personal life. So from like the end of October, beginning of November, all the way through most of February, I kind of fell out of love in writing. And when I realized that in February, it was really scary. I knew I had a lot of work to do to rebuild. And so in March of this year, I began to work really hard to rediscover my love for writing. I decided to go back to my passion project, the thing that made me so excited to write in the first place, and so I was just kind of, like casually working on the 3rd draft of The Dark Between. That's kind of my quick update of what I've been writing over the past 5 years, and I know it might have been a little bit complicated, and if it was, I apologize for that. So, over the past 5 years of my writing life, I have kind of focused on 2 things. For about the first 1.5 to 2 years, I focused very much on just learning how to love writing. I kind of fell in love with it, and I just kind of casually wrote whenever I felt like it. But then I realized that if I just wrote whenever I felt like it, and I never really did any study of the craft of writing, I was never going to get anywhere as a writer. So over the past 3.5 years, I've been focusing very, very intensely on learning the craft of writing. And that's what I've been sharing with you guys as well over at my website at well-storied.com. But in the past couple of months, I've kind of felt a shift in my writing life take place. For the very first time, I can look at some of the things that I've written and say, hey, this is actually publishable. It's got good publishing potential, and that's kind of crazy. So all of a sudden, I'm finally kind of turning my eyes towards publishing. And I know I've talked about publishing online a bit in the past, and I think I've said even to some people who've asked when my books are coming out, like, oh, I'm hoping to publish in 2016, I'm hoping to publish in 2017, and honestly, I think I said those things rather naively, so if you were disappointed that my books didn't come out in those years, I'm very, very sorry. But yeah, now I'm finally in a place where I can look at my writing and see that it has potential to be published, and so I'm kind of turning my eyes in the direction of publishing. Now, for a while, I have been debating about whether I want to pursue traditional or self-publishing, and part of me wants to pursue both. Last year on my blog, I had kind of declared that I was going to pursue self-publishing because I had such a strong interest in business. I love being self-employed, and so being self-employed had worked out so well for me with fiction related things that I thought, why not do the same with self-publishing? And so I kind of announced to the world last year that self-publishing was going to be the thing that I pursue. Now I'm in a place where I don't think that that is truly what I want to pursue. I do think that for the time being, I would actually like to pursue the traditional publishing route, go with the agent, go with the book deal if, things happen to work out. I wish I had more to say on why I made that decision. It's just kind of what my gut is telling me. It's what I've wanted since I, had decided that I wanted to be a writer. And I just don't want to ignore my gut. I want to do what feels right. And at the moment, kind of preparing a manuscript to query is what feels right to me. So what are my publishing plans? What do I hope to query first? When am I going to query? All of that good stuff. First, let me just say that I do not currently have a manuscript that is ready to query now. When I said that I looked at my writing and finally saw some potential for publishing, I did not mean that I looked at a full manuscript and suddenly it was there, or something that was just perfect to send out to agents and publishers. No, and I truly do hesitate to say this because I have made so many, statements in the past that have proven not to, come to fruition. But I will say that I do think I can have a manuscript ready to query within the next 6 to 12 months. And the book that I am hoping to query first is Lady Legacy, the first book in my Books of Maveren quartet. There are 3 reasons why I hope to publish Lady Legacy first, and let's go through them now. The first reason is that Lady Legacy takes place in the same world as my passion project. Maveren, like I said earlier, is the world that I hope will become my Narnia, my Westeros. It's really important to me that the first book I query, the first book that I try to get published, is going to set me off in that direction, in hopefully building a career based on my story world. The second reason that I'm hoping to query and publish Lady Legacy first is because it's good for debut authors to try to sell a book that fits market standards first. And so, as I mentioned briefly earlier, though The Dark Between is my passion project, it does not fit market standards by any stretch of the imagination. Lady Legacy fits that bill. Lady Legacy is a single point of view novel. It is well under 100,000 words, unlike The Dark Between, and it's a book that for the most part kind of follows industry standards. It does have a bit of a twist ending that I can't really talk about without getting spoilery, something that might be a little bit more of a risk, but generally speaking, this is a book that fairly well fits market standards. But the third and final reason that I'm choosing to query Lady Legacy first, in all likelihood anyway, is because The Dark Between, my passion project, which for so long I always said was going to be the first book that I publish, the more I work on it, the more I realize just how massive this series is. It will be my opus. It will be a tome. It'll be the thing that, has to gesticulate for like 10, 12, 15, who knows how many years before The Dark Between is the thing that I want to be known for. And I'm not just going to skimp on things, to cut corners, to do kind of, a half-hearted job on writing and working on this series in order to publish it first, or to publish it sooner. So for that reason, I chose Lady Legacy to kind of be my main focus at the moment. My ideal plan for my publishing career, which hopefully it'll work out this way, but who knows because the industry is so very fickle, and also life just kind of goes on and things change, is to kick off my career with Lady Legacy and hopefully get all 4 books of the Books of Maveren published. From there, I do believe that I can have the first book in the Dark Between series ready to go. But I am just so nervous to put all of this out there on the internet too, because like I said, so much changes so fast. There are absolutely no guarantees with the publishing industry. So please take all of this with a grain of salt. So right now that's my plan, but we'll see how things turn out. However, I recently briefly mentioned that I was working on a completely brand new project, and you may be thinking to yourself, what in the world are you doing, Kristen? It sounds like you have so many irons in the fire. What in the world are you doing working on a brand new project? This I will tell you. Sometimes, oftentimes really, the traditional publishing industry kind of doesn't go as planned for authors. It makes building a career kind of difficult because the market is so fickle. Trends come and go, and lots of times authors get left in the lurch. Maybe they land an agent, but a book deal doesn't come through, or maybe they sell their first book, but it doesn't do too well, and so the publishing house doesn't pick up the rest of the series. Or maybe they have a series underway, but the publishing house merges or folds, or their editor leaves, or it's just there's so many things that can happen. And that's why it's so important to have a backup plan. To be working on a book that is kind of completely different from everything else that you're working on, that kind of can be the plan B in case you need to breathe new life into your crumbling career. I don't really have a book like this. All the books that I've written thus far, besides Dreamworld, take place in the world of Maveren. And so if I go to sell a Maveren book and it doesn't do well, or for whatever reason, that my career starts to crumble, I can't just propose another book that's set in Maveren and hope that publishers will be interested in it. That's just not how things are going to work out. Instead, I need a brand new book that can hopefully serve as my plan B in case of emergency. Now, Dreamworld could be that book for me, and it's kind of nice that I have the whole first draft written because perhaps I'll need a plan C someday and I'll need to whip that out. But I'm just not super terribly passionate about Dreamworld. That's just not something I'm all that interested in. However, I do have a lot of story ideas that come along that I consciously choose not to work on because they would be a distraction from my current projects. So in this file of story ideas, there is one story idea above all the rest that I just absolutely love, and I cannot get this stupid book out of my head. So when I realized, a month or two ago, if you plan to pursue traditional publishing, you're probably going to need a backup book, I chose to kind of crack open that file of story ideas and kind of extract this particular story idea and begin playing around with it kind of casually for fun in my spare time. This story idea is currently called The Revolutionaries. That's not some grand title. It's probably not what I would ever pitch the book as. This book is a YA novel that I like to call Six of Crows meets Hamilton the musical. If you haven't read Six of Crows or seen Hamilton, that probably doesn't make very much sense. Basically, The Revolutionaries is a young adult kind of spy heist novel that is inspired by the American Revolution, specifically inspired by the Culper ring that took place in New York City, the Culper spy ring, but it takes place in a fantasy world of my own making. This is a completely different fantasy world than Maverin, which is so exciting because I've yet to build any other fantasy worlds besides Maverin, so it's really cool to be working on one. But yeah, The Revolutionaries is basically my Plan B novel that I'm just kind of beginning to play around with now. I'm very, very excited about it though. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun. It's probably the most crazy, wacky story I've ever played around with, and I'm super excited to be just kind of working on it, so we'll see where things go. Finally today, I just want to talk about what I mentioned earlier, how I am no longer planning, at least, to share any writing plans online. I know I did kind of share a tiny bit about my publishing plans here today, but those were kind of vague enough, and hopefully I gave enough of a disclaimer that they might not happen. But yeah, unlike past months where I have made public online writing goals each and every month, I don't plan to do that anymore. And the reason is that over the past 2 years, while I've been kind of publicly sharing my goals online, I've just had such a hard time maintaining my love for writing. And honestly, I think one of the root causes of that is the fact that I have been sharing my goals online. I think the public pressure to succeed, the public pressure to live up to these goals that I've set, that I've put out there into the world, is making me seize up. It's making me worry so much about failing that I'm failing because I can't even get started. So I'm going to do this little experiment. I'm going to stop sharing my personal kind of monthly writing goals online and just see if I can fall in love with writing in the same way that I had been in love with writing before I started my online presence. However, I do plan to still do updates. I probably won't do an update on my writing journey every single month, but I think it would be good to do an update every 2 to 3 months, kind of seasonal. Or of course, anytime something really exciting may happen, I would definitely share that with you guys. Because you guys have been so incredibly supportive of my writing journey so far, and of course I always want to keep you in the loop. I hope you enjoyed this kind of very rambly, possibly confusing update on my writing journey. If you have any questions about my writing and would like me to maybe do like a Q&A about my writing, I would love to do that. Please leave your questions for me in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to make sure that you see future writing updates, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!